Marcus had always dreamed of owning a home where he could finally relax after years of hard work. When he bought the little house on a quiet suburban street, he felt proud. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, but it was his, and he wanted to make it feel warm and beautiful. One of the first things he did after moving in was plant hedges along the front yard. They weren't just plants to him, they represented privacy, comfort, and a sense of home. Every morning, Marcus would step outside with his coffee, take a deep breath of fresh air, and trim the hedges with care. The green wall made him feel secure, almost like it was shielding him from the outside world. Most of his neighbors nodded politely when they walked past. Some even complimented his yard, saying the hedges looked neat and added charm to the street. But not everyone saw it that way. A woman on the HOA board, known by many in the neighborhood for her strictness, often looked at Marcus's yard with disapproval. Her name was Claire, but almost everyone in whispers called her Karen because she acted as if she ruled the neighborhood. She had a reputation for complaining about the smallest things, whether it was a mailbox being painted the wrong color, a trash can left out too long, or grass that wasn't trimmed perfectly. Marcus tried to stay out of her way. He believed that if he followed the rules carefully, she would have no reason to bother him. Before planting the hedges, he checked the HOA handbook, reading every line about landscaping. He made sure the hedge height was acceptable, the spacing was proper, and that the plants he chose were not on the restricted list. He even kept receipts and notes in case anyone ever questioned him. To him, it was more than just gardening, it was about doing things the right way. But Karen seemed determined to find fault. She would stop by while Marcus was trimming the hedges and make comments like, "These are too tall for our neighborhood standard," or "They don't match the look of the street." Marcus, polite as always, would smile and explain that the guidelines allowed hedges of that height. She would frown, mutter under her breath, and walk away, but her eyes carried a warning that she wasn't done. Despite her disapproval, Marcus felt proud of his little sanctuary. He often thought of how far he had come. Growing up, he didn't have much. He worked multiple jobs, saved every dollar, and finally managed to buy his own house. Every hedge he planted reminded him of his hard-earned success. But Karen's glares sometimes stole his peace. He wondered why she couldn't just let him be happy. One Saturday morning, Marcus had an unexpected encounter. As he was mowing his lawn, he noticed Karen speaking with another board member across the street. They both glanced toward his house while flipping through a binder. Marcus couldn't hear them clearly, but he caught fragments like landscaping and not uniform. His stomach tightened, but he shook it off. He thought, "I've done nothing wrong. I have the rules on my side." Still, the unease lingered. That evening, he walked along the property line, double-checking the measurements of his hedges. He ran his fingers along the leaves, reminding himself that everything was fine. The neighborhood handbook lay open on his kitchen table, and he reread the section on fencing and greenery again just to reassure himself. But Karen wasn't the type to let things go. A few days later, Marcus was watering his hedges when she approached with a clipboard. "Marcus," she said sharply, "I've received complaints that your hedges are obstructing the uniform view of the street. You'll need to remove them or cut them much lower." Marcus set down his hose, wiped his hands, and replied calmly, "I've read the guidelines carefully. My hedges are within the rules." He tried to keep his voice even, respectful, though inside he felt a flare of frustration. Karen pursed her lips. "Rules are one thing, but aesthetics are another. We're trying to keep the neighborhood looking the same." "I understand," Marcus said, "but I've done nothing wrong. These hedges are part of my property, and they're allowed." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." Then she turned sharply and walked away. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He replayed the conversation over and over in his mind. He knew he was right, but he also knew Karen had influence in the HOA. He had heard stories from other neighbors how she once forced a family to repaint their door 3 times because the color wasn't neutral enough, or how she fined an elderly couple for leaving their recycling bin outside overnight. It seemed she thrived on control. The following morning, Marcus went outside as usual to check on his plants. The sun had just risen, and the street was quiet. But when he reached the front yard, his heart sank. His hedges, his carefully trimmed, beloved hedges, were gone. All that was left were jagged stumps and scattered leaves. The green wall that had brought him peace had been reduced to nothing overnight. Marcus froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. He dropped to his knees, touching the cut branches. The clean cuts told him this wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately chopped them down. He felt a lump in his throat, a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. As he stood there in shock, a voice came from behind him. "You're welcome," Karen said, standing proudly with pruning shears in hand. "Now your yard looks more in line with the neighborhood." Marcus stared at her, his chest tight. He wanted to shout, but he didn't. He wanted to demand answers, but his words stuck. Instead, he slowly reached for his phone and snapped photos of the damage. "You had no right," he finally managed to say, his voice low but steady. Karen shrugged. "I was only doing what needed to be done. You'll thank me later." She walked away as if she had done a good deed, leaving Marcus standing in the ruins of his front yard. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, looking at what was left of his hedges. The air felt heavy, and his once peaceful yard now looked bare and violated. But as Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, something inside him shifted. Instead of breaking down, a quiet strength rose in him. He thought about all the struggles he had faced before in life, the long hours, the doubters, the obstacles, and how he had always found a way through. Slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. Karen thought she had won by cutting down his hedges, but she had only pushed him to build something even stronger. Marcus didn't say another word to her that day, but deep inside, he had already decided his next move. It would be bold, it would be legal, and it would be something Karen could never undo. Marcus spent the rest of that day in silence, pacing inside his house, looking out the window every now and then at the empty space where his hedges used to stand. It felt strange seeing so much of the street from his living room. The sense of privacy he had carefully built over time had been ripped away in a matter of hours. The stumps were a painful reminder that someone had crossed a line. Instead of letting his anger control him, Marcus did something he had learned over the years. He stayed calm and thought things through. He went back outside with his phone, taking more photos from every angle. He measured the cut hedges, recorded the date and time, and even asked a friendly neighbor across the street, Mrs. Wilson, if she had seen anything. She had. She told him she saw Karen in his yard early in the morning, proudly clipping away like she was pruning her own garden. Mrs. Wilson shook her head. "She thinks she runs this neighborhood. But she's gone too far this time." Marcus thanked her, grateful to have a witness. He knew documenting everything was important. He had dealt with challenges before, and he understood that proof was more powerful than anger. He went inside and made a folder on his computer, labeling it Hedge Incident. Every picture, every note, and even Mrs. Wilson's written statement went into that folder. Still, the loss hurt. That evening, when he sat on his porch with his coffee, he looked out at the bare yard. The place where the hedges once stood looked exposed, empty, and almost unwelcoming. But as he stared at it, an idea began to grow in his mind. If Karen thought she could intimidate him by cutting down his hedges, she was wrong. Instead of replanting them, he decided he would build something stronger, something permanent. That night, Marcus stayed up late researching. He read through the HOA handbook again, paying close attention to the section on fences, boundaries, and property structures. The rules were clear: fences and walls were allowed as long as they were within a certain height and built with approved materials. There was no rule against using cinder blocks. He even found notes in city regulations confirming that as long as he stayed within his property line and did not exceed height restrictions, he had every right to build a wall. The next morning, Marcus drove to a local supply store. He walked through the aisles, his eyes scanning the stacks of cinder blocks, cement bags, and tools. Running his hand across the cool, rough surface of the blocks, he felt a sense of determination. These won't be cut down with a pair of shears, he thought. He ordered a large number of cinder blocks and had them scheduled for delivery. The cashier looked at him curiously and asked, "Building something big?" Marcus smiled faintly. "You could say that." When the delivery truck arrived a few days later, the entire neighborhood noticed. Pallets of heavy gray blocks were unloaded onto his driveway. Neighbors peeked out their windows, whispering among themselves. Some were curious, others amused, and a few were supportive. Mrs. Wilson came over and asked, "Are you really building a wall?" "Yes," Marcus replied calmly. "If hedges aren't good enough for them, I'll build something stronger." She laughed and patted his shoulder. "Good for you. Sometimes you have to stand your ground." Karen, however, was not amused. She marched across the street as the delivery truck pulled away. "What is all this?" she demanded, pointing at the blocks. Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans. "Materials for my wall. Perfectly allowed by the HOA. You can't just build a wall here," she snapped. "Actually," Marcus said, holding up the handbook, "I can. Page 35, Section 7. Maximum height is 6 feet. These blocks are 4 inches tall each, so I'll be well within the rules. Would you like me to highlight the section for you?" Karen's face turned red. She muttered something under her breath and stormed off. The next day, Marcus started his project. He laid the first row of cinder blocks with care, leveling them perfectly. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he felt satisfaction with every block he placed. The sound of cement being mixed, the scrape of stone against stone, and the steady rhythm of his work gave him energy. It wasn't just construction, it was healing. Children riding bikes stopped to watch. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed down to see what was happening. Some gave him thumbs up. One man even offered to lend him a wheelbarrow. Marcus thanked them, accepting the help with gratitude. Slowly, the wall began to rise, and with it, so did Marcus's spirits. Karen couldn't stay away. By the third day of construction, she was back, this time waving her clipboard. "You're disturbing the peace with all this noise," she shouted. Marcus paused, resting his hands on a block. "It's the middle of the day, Karen. Construction is allowed until 6 in the evening. I've checked." She sputtered, flipping through her papers, searching for a reason to stop him. Finding none, she turned on her heel and left in frustration. The wall grew taller each day, and so did the attention it attracted. Soon, it wasn't just about Marcus anymore. Neighbors who had once been silent about Karen's behavior started speaking up. They told Marcus stories of how she had harassed them too, fining them unfairly, criticizing their decorations, and even threatening them with letters. Seeing Marcus stand firm inspired them. By the end of the week, the wall stood half its final height, and already it made Marcus feel safer. When he sat on his porch, he no longer felt exposed. Each block was like a piece of his dignity, carefully stacked and cemented into place. Karen tried one more trick. She called the city inspector, hoping they would shut down the project. When the inspector arrived, Marcus greeted him politely, showing his permits, the HOA handbook, and the city code. The inspector nodded approvingly. "You're doing everything by the book. Keep it up." Karen's face fell when she heard those words. For the first time, she realized Marcus wasn't someone she could push around. That evening, as Marcus cleaned up his tools, he noticed several neighbors standing nearby, smiling. One of them clapped and said, "Good job, Marcus." About time someone stood up to her. Others nodded in agreement. For Marcus, this wasn't just about building a wall. It was about reclaiming his peace and showing that calm strength could withstand pettiness. Each block he laid wasn't just stone and cement, it was a statement that he belonged here, that he had every right to live in peace, and that no one, not even Karen with her shears and clipboard, could take that away. As the sun set, Marcus leaned against the half-finished wall, sipping his water. The air smelled of cement and fresh determination. He thought about his hedges and how much they had meant to him, but then he looked at the rising wall and realized something powerful. Sometimes life tears down what you build, but it gives you the chance to build something even stronger. And that was exactly what he was doing. Marcus woke up early the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The half-finished cinder block wall stood proudly in his front yard, catching the first rays of sunlight. To Marcus, it wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol. It represented strength, dignity, and the determination not to be walked over. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stepped outside, and admired the work he had done so far. The wall wasn't finished yet, but it already gave him a sense of security that the Hedges had never been able to. That day, Marcus gathered his tools and continued laying block after block. With each one, the wall grew taller, and so did the curiosity of the neighborhood. People slowed down their cars as they drove past. Others stopped mid-jog, pretending to tie their shoelaces just so they could sneak a longer look. Children on bicycles parked their bikes nearby, whispering to each other about how cool it looked. Some neighbors walked right up to Marcus, asking questions. One man named Daniel, who lived 2 houses down, said, "I like what you're doing here. She's been giving me trouble for years about the color of my shutters. Maybe I should have built a wall too." Marcus chuckled. "Well, I'm not trying to start a trend. I'm just trying to protect my peace." Daniel nodded, but there was admiration in his eyes. "Still, it's good to see someone standing up to her. She's been running this place like her personal kingdom." The more Marcus worked, the more the wall became a topic of conversation. Some neighbors were openly supportive, while others remained quiet, afraid of crossing Karen. But even the silent ones would smile at Marcus when they passed, giving him small gestures of encouragement. Karen, on the other hand, grew more and more agitated. Each day she came out with new complaints. First, she said the wall was ugly. Then, she claimed it didn't fit the neighborhood's style. After that, she accused Marcus of lowering the property value of surrounding homes. One afternoon, as Marcus was carefully spreading cement between the blocks, Karen stormed across the street, waving her clipboard like a flag. "This is ridiculous," she shouted loud enough for half the street to hear. "You can't just build a prison wall in the middle of our neighborhood." Marcus calmly set down his trowel and wiped his hands. "It's not a prison wall, Karen. It's a fence. And it's allowed by the HOA rules and city code." Karen's voice rose even higher. "This is an eyesore. People are going to complain." Marcus looked around. Several neighbors were already watching. Some of them shook their heads, clearly fed up with her behavior. "Funny," Marcus said gently, "the only complaint I've received so far is from you." Karen's face turned red. She sputtered for a moment before stomping back to her house, slamming the door behind her. Later that evening, Marcus heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, a group of neighbors stood there with friendly smiles. Mrs. Wilson was in front, holding a plate of cookies. "We just wanted to say we support you," she said warmly. "That woman has been making life hard for all of us for years. Seeing you build this wall, well, it feels like you're building it for all of us." Marcus was touched. He invited them in for a few minutes, and they shared stories about Karen's long history of overstepping her authority. One couple explained how she had forced them to remove a swing set from their backyard because it wasn't in line with the HOA's image. Another man said she had sent him a letter demanding he repaint his fence, even though it was the same color as the others on the block. As Marcus listened, he realized that his wall had become more than just a boundary. It had turned into a symbol for the neighborhood. He was the first to challenge Karen openly, and his courage was giving others the strength to finally speak up. The following days brought even more drama. Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting, trying to rally support against Marcus. She sent out emails filled with exaggerated claims that his wall was monstrous and out of character for the community. She even suggested that the wall posed a safety risk, though she couldn't explain how. But at the meeting, something surprising happened. One by one, neighbors began speaking up not against Marcus, but against her. They shared their frustrations about her constant nitpicking and unfair fines. They pointed out that Marcus had followed every rule and had every right to build his wall. For the first time, Karen found herself outnumbered. Marcus didn't attend the meeting. He didn't feel the need. He had already shown his stance through his actions. But word reached him the next day that people were tired of Karen's antics. They were beginning to question her leadership in the HOA. Meanwhile, Marcus kept working steadily, focusing on the wall. He didn't gloat, he didn't argue, and he didn't let Karen's shouting matches distract him. He believed that the best way to win was through patience and persistence. And every block he placed was proof of that belief. By the end of the second week, the wall was nearly complete. Its sturdy gray surface stood tall and unyielding, stretching across the front of his yard. Marcus smoothed the last layers of cement, feeling proud of the work he had accomplished with his own hands. He knew it wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about building resilience, both for himself and for the community around him. Karen, of course, couldn't accept defeat so easily. On the final day of construction, she appeared again, this time with a camera. She walked up and down the sidewalk, snapping photos of the wall from every angle. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll find a way to bring this down." Marcus didn't even bother responding. He simply continued working, focusing on the final touches. He knew she might try, but he also knew he had done everything by the book. That night, when the sun dipped low and the street grew quiet, Marcus stood in front of the finished wall. It cast a strong shadow across his yard, but to him, it didn't feel heavy or oppressive. It felt protective. It felt like freedom. And as he stood there, he thought about how strange it was. Karen had tried to humiliate him by cutting down his hedges, but instead, she had pushed him to build something far stronger. What was meant to break his spirit had only built him up. The neighbors noticed it too. When they passed by, many would stop and admire the craftsmanship. Some even joked that Karen's reign over the neighborhood had finally met its match, not in angry words or shouting matches, but in a simple, silent wall that no one could tear down. For Marcus, the lesson was clear: sometimes the best response to injustice is not loud arguments, but calm, steady action. And that action, block by block, had turned into a wall that would stand for years to come. Karen could not stay quiet after Marcus finished his wall. To her, it was like a personal defeat, a reminder that she had not been able to control him the way she controlled others. Every time she looked out her window and saw the strong cinder block structure, she felt her authority slipping away. She began planning ways to fight back, hoping she could still win this battle. The first thing she did was send a long email to the entire neighborhood. In it, she described the wall as unsightly, damaging to property values, and against the community spirit. She urged everyone to support her in demanding that Marcus tear it down. But to her surprise, the email did not bring the response she expected. Some neighbors ignored it, while others quietly forwarded it to Marcus, warning him of her plans. A few even replied all, reminding Karen that Marcus had followed the rules, and suggesting that maybe the real issue was her behavior. Not willing to give up, Karen tried another tactic. She called the HOA board together for an emergency meeting. She stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, and argued that Marcus's wall would destroy the charm of the neighborhood. She waved printed photos around, raising her voice and demanding action. But this time, instead of silent nods, she faced resistance. One board member finally spoke up: "Karen, the wall meets our guidelines. We've checked. He has every right to build it. We cannot punish him for following the rules." Another added, "Honestly, Karen, this whole issue is making us look bad as a board. We've received more complaints about your handling of this than about the wall itself." Karen's mouth fell open. She wasn't used to being challenged. For years, her voice had dominated every meeting, every decision. But now the tide was turning, and she could feel it slipping away from her grasp. Meanwhile, Marcus kept living his life quietly. He didn't attend the meetings, and he didn't respond to her angry emails. Instead, he focused on enjoying the peace that his new wall gave him. For the first time since moving in, he felt truly at home. When he sat on his porch in the evenings, sipping his coffee and watching the sunset over the sturdy grey wall, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Still, Karen tried one last dramatic move. She called the city inspector again, this time insisting there must be some hidden violation. The inspector arrived, walked carefully around Marcus's yard, and measured the wall. Marcus welcomed him warmly, showing the paperwork and pointing out the HOA guidelines. After checking everything, the inspector smiled and said, "You've done everything right, Marcus. This wall isn't going anywhere." The words felt like music to Marcus's ears. Karen, however, turned pale with frustration. She tried to argue, but the inspector cut her off. "Ma'am, unless you can show me a specific violation, there's nothing more to discuss." That moment was powerful, not just for Marcus, but for the entire neighborhood. People had gathered outside, curious about what would happen. When they heard the inspector's verdict, they exchanged knowing looks. Some even clapped softly. Karen stormed back to her house without another word, slamming her door so hard it echoed down the street. After that, the wall became more than just Marcus's project, it became a landmark in the community. Neighbors started calling it the Wall of Peace or Marcus's stand. It was a daily reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with unfairness is not to fight with anger, but to build something that speaks for itself. In the weeks that followed, Marcus noticed a shift in the neighborhood. People who had once been silent about Karen's behavior now felt encouraged to speak up. At the next HOA election, several residents nominated new board members who promised to be fair and reasonable. For the first time in years, the board had a chance to change, and Karen's control weakened. Marcus never bragged about his victory. He didn't gloat, and he didn't rub it in Karen's face. Instead, he kept tending to his home, planting flowers along the base of his wall to soften its look. Bright marigolds and roses bloomed against the grey stone, making the wall not only strong but also beautiful. The wall became a place of conversation. Neighbors walking by would stop to admire the flowers, complimenting Marcus on his gardening skills. Some even shared that they finally felt hope that the neighborhood could improve now that Karen's influence was being challenged. Marcus always smiled and said, "It's just a wall." But sometimes a wall can change more than you expect. Karen, on the other hand, became more isolated. Where she once had power, now she had resistance. Neighbors grew tired of her constant complaints, and slowly, her voice lost its weight. She still muttered about the wall when she walked past, but fewer and fewer people listened. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch, Mrs. Wilson came over with her little dog. She looked at the wall, then at Marcus, and said softly, "You know, this wall isn't just for you. It's for all of us. You showed us that we don't have to let one person control everything. You gave us courage." Marcus was touched. He hadn't thought of it that way. To him, the wall was about his privacy and peace. But hearing her words made him realize it was bigger than that. His simple act of standing firm had inspired an entire community. The wall stood strong, day after day, while Karen's influence crumbled piece by piece. She had tried to cut down Marcus's hedges to make him feel small, but all she had done was push him to build something that no one could ignore. Marcus often reflected on the irony of it all. If she had just left his hedges alone, none of this would have happened. But sometimes, life works in strange ways. Out of frustration came strength, and out of conflict came change. And so, in that quiet neighborhood where one woman once tried to control everything, a simple wall became a turning point. It was proof that calm persistence could outlast even the loudest opposition. Marcus leaned back in his chair one quiet evening, sipping his warm cup of tea while gazing at the sturdy cinder block wall that now stood proudly at the edge of his yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and purple streaks, and the wall glowed softly in the fading light. It wasn't just a wall of stone anymore, it was a story, a statement, and a lesson. Neighbors now walked by with smiles, children often stopped to run their fingers along its cool surface, and even the birds seemed to like perching on top of it. For Marcus, it was a daily reminder that patience and persistence could turn unfairness into strength. The weeks after the wall was finished brought many changes to the neighborhood. Slowly, the whispers about Karen grew louder. People had tolerated her behavior for years because they thought they had no choice. But when Marcus built his wall and refused to back down, it gave them a new sense of courage. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere felt different. Instead of the usual silence when Karen spoke, neighbors raised their hands, questioned her decisions, and openly disagreed with her. Some even shared personal stories of how she had fined them unfairly or embarrassed them in front of others. For the first time, Karen's authority was truly crumbling. Marcus didn't attend those meetings. He didn't need to. His wall spoke louder than any speech could. Still, neighbors often came to his porch afterward, telling him how the balance of power in the HOA was shifting. A young couple who lived down the street told Marcus, "We voted in new board members today. Things are going to be different now." Another neighbor added, "Honestly, it all started with you. You gave us the courage to finally stand up." Marcus would smile humbly, never claiming victory for himself. He simply said, "Sometimes you just have to do what's right for your own peace. And when you do, it ends up helping others too." Karen, however, didn't disappear completely. She still muttered under her breath when she walked past Marcus's yard, shaking her head at the sight of the wall. But her voice no longer carried weight. When she complained to neighbors, they no longer nodded in agreement, they rolled their eyes, politely excused themselves, and walked away. Her power had slipped through her fingers, not because Marcus shouted or fought with her, but because he showed a better way. Meanwhile, Marcus made the wall even more inviting. He planted colorful flowers along its base, roses, tulips, and marigolds. He hung little clay pots from hooks attached to the wall, filling them with herbs like basil and mint. The gray stone became a canvas for life and color, turning what Karen once called an eyesore into the most admired feature of the neighborhood. People often stopped to compliment it, and Marcus would laugh softly, saying, "It's just a wall, but I'm glad you like it." Children in the neighborhood began calling it the magic wall. They played near it, raced their bikes around it, and pretended it was a castle wall in their make-believe games. Marcus enjoyed watching them laugh, remembering how something that began with destruction had now turned into joy. As the seasons changed, the wall stood firm. In the winter, it caught snow on its top, making it look like a frosted cake. In the spring, bright flowers bloomed around it, and in the summer, its strong shade helped keep the plants near it cool. Each season gave it a new personality, but its strength remained constant. One afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected letter from the new HOA board. Nervously, he opened it, wondering if it would be another complaint. But to his surprise, it was a letter of thanks. The board wrote, "Your resilience and calm example have helped inspire change in this community. We want to thank you for reminding us that rules should serve people, not the other way around. We are committed to making the HOA fairer and friendlier going forward." Marcus folded the letter with a small smile. He didn't need recognition, but it felt good to know his quiet stand had left an impact. Over time, the wall became less of a topic of controversy and more of a symbol of unity. Neighbors gathered near it during evening walks, often stopping to chat. Some even suggested organizing block parties, something Karen had always discouraged in the past. With her influence gone, the neighborhood slowly grew warmer and more connected. Marcus continued his daily routine of tending to his yard. Each morning, he watered the flowers, trimmed the plants, and made sure the wall stayed neat and clean. He no longer worried about someone tearing down his work or trying to control his choices. Instead, he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't felt since moving in. Sometimes, while working outside, Marcus thought about the irony of the whole situation. If Karen had simply left his hedges alone, he would never have built the wall. But because she overstepped, she had pushed him to create something much stronger, something permanent. In trying to weaken him, she had ended up strengthening him and changing the neighborhood forever. On one particular evening, Marcus was sitting on his porch when Mrs. Wilson came over again, her little dog trotting beside her. She looked at the wall glowing in the golden sunset and said, "Marcus, I don't think you realize what you've done. You didn't just build a wall, you built a reminder that we all have the right to peace in our own homes." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe so. But to me, it's just a wall that lets me sleep at night without worrying." Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. "Sometimes that's all it takes to inspire others. One person standing firm." As night fell, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked up at the stars. The wall stood steady in the darkness, a guardian of his peace. He thought about his journey, the joy of planting his hedges, the pain of losing them, the frustration of dealing with unfairness, and finally, the triumph of building something lasting. The wall wasn't just concrete and stone. It was his story written in blocks, a story of dignity, patience, and quiet strength. And it would stand long after the arguments had faded, reminding everyone who passed by that true strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from building something that cannot be torn down. And so, in that little suburban neighborhood, Marcus found peace not by fighting back with anger, but by building a wall that told the world he belonged there. It was a lesson that his neighbors would never forget, and one that would be passed down each time someone pointed to the cinder block wall and said, "That's where it all changed."